Ben Riggs presents Reading D&D Aloud. Episode 31, The Bladesinger with Eliza Lambeert.
Greetings, one and all to Reading Dungeons and Dragons Aloud. I am controversial historian Ben Riggs, uh, and with me is Dungeon Master, teacher, actor, and internet luminary Eliza Lambert. Hello, Eliza.
Hey, excited to read some nerd stuff today.
So now, just out of curiosity, how many editions of D&D have you played?
I have only played fourth one time. Uh 3.5 we played together, right? Was that
Yep, yep, yeah,
3.5?
yeah. We played 3.5 for a while.
3.5 with with one campaign, and then fifth edition is my most commonly played.
Are you usually player or dungeon master?
I've actually had a pretty good mix, about half and half.
That is a fortunate mix. That might be ideal.
I have only DM'd fifth edition. I have never DM'd fourth or 3.5.
I'd
Those
love
I've
to
only been.
I'd love to know about the one time you played fourth, but I'll save that for later. So what we're going to read today is from the Complete Book of Elves by Colin McComb, um, and it's from second edition. And second edition had something called character kits, which were like kind of like super classes. Like you'd take a class and then you'd lay a kit on top of it, and this is a fighter mage kit for elves. Uh, and unless you have any questions, I'm just going to launch in to reading this aloud.
Sounds
Because,
great. I'll be reading it along on my copy with you.
okay, cool beans.
I
This
have a
is,
low attention span.
well, and again, please feel free to interrupt at any time. This is from chapter 10, page 88, The Bladesinger. Of the roving elves, there are few as deadly as the Bladesinger. They are masters of their weapons, and have spent their lives in the study of their chosen weapons. They have also learned to cast spells while engaged in combat, and thus they double their might. And when I read that when I was 12, they had me right there. I'm like, ooh, they get to be a fighter and cast spells at the same time. I am happy about this. All right.
That's
Can,
an interesting concept. Yeah. I did you ever play second edition then?
so
Or
very, very barely. Like for me, like I got a bunch of D&D books in seventh and eighth grade, but I had no friends. So I didn't play much D&D. It was largely a literary pursuit where I would like read the books and then make characters. And I sure loved making two-handed elven fighter mage blade singers, let me tell you. And then by the time high school came around, when I actually had some friends, they were all playing other stuff, and I moved on from D&D to Vampire, Rifts, Shadowrun, Mage the Ascension, Call of Cthulhu, and I played a ton of those games in high school. But D&D has never been my main jam, um, and I guess except for seventh and eighth grade when I couldn't play it. But uh, it's always been a thing I've kept up with and have had interest in, and it's obviously the most popular tabletop role playing game. So I just I read the stuff and kind of keep up. And my favorite playing experiences have actually been in the past 10 years. So I've played more D&D in the past 10 years than any other 10 years of my life.
I would agree with that, considering the past 10 years is the only time I've played D&D. Um I got a late start and I didn't do it until college. My very first campaign was that time I played fourth edition, as I was telling you about. So
Oh.
I'm really surprised about how long it took me to get into it, based off of me being the type of nerd that I am, and being into fantasy and role play and being a theater kid. I'm surprised it took me until the age of 22 to start playing.
And now I have to ask though, so you started playing in 2014 with fourth edition, is that right?
I started playing in 2016 with fourth edition because my first DM, he was a super fan of fourth edition. And if I'm being honest, I only started playing this campaign because my boyfriend at the time was in it. Um, and I was like, yeah, whatever. I'll hang out. I'll see what this is. So I wasn't really paying attention for the first few sessions. So I really can't speak as to how different or similar the character creation is because I kind of was checked out for the first two sessions. And then once I started checking in and actually engaging with the game, I was like, wait, this is really fun. And then I bought a bunch of books and started playing and DMing myself. But yeah, I'm kind of sad that I didn't engage fully in the game the first few sessions I played because I missed out on a lot.
But it's so interesting that you started with fourth edition in the era of fifth edition, that you found some hard-bitten fan of fourth who was just not moving on. Although,
Pretty
like,
much, yes.
my understanding is that so there's the like standard fourth edition, which I have behind me here, that I haven't even read all of. But 2 years later, they released it all again in a format called D&D Essentials. And whereas the books behind me apparently have a number of errors and flaws, for example, apparently right before publication, uh one of the head D&D guys was just like, all the hit points are too low, and went and just farted a bunch of hit points into everything. So you would like get through combat, everyone would exhaust their powers, and it would be like two or three more rounds of just plugging away, plugging away, plugging away before a combat finally ended. So my understanding is that like all of those things were fixed in the 2 years later, like the 2010 version, and that game, if you're looking for like a tactical combat game at the table, like it can be a ton of fun. So again, I don't know if you were which version you were playing, but like I guess even if you were playing the broken version, D&D is still very fun. I mean, the first version of D&D from 1974 was probably pretty terrible, but like it still had, character classes and advancement and magic items and dungeons, and people were like, "Oh, well, video games don't exist. This is amazing."
I mean, yeah, I don't have much to add on to that because it was spoken so eloquently.
But when you were buying books, you bought fifth edition?
Yes, I bought fifth edition when I started buying books. Went straight to Barnes and Noble and had to limit myself to only buy two because they were terribly expensive for a college student making minimum wage at Subway. But the first one that I bought it before I had a shift at Subway, and it was luckily really, really slow. I bought the Dungeon Master's Guide. So like that's what I bought first, is I bought the Dungeon Master's Guide, fifth edition. And I bought it before one of my shifts at Subway, and it was a really slow night because it was in the middle of winter. And whenever there wasn't a customer in the store, I had it on the the prep table back there, just reading through,
No,
putting bookmarks in, highlighting the heck out of it.
that is fascinating because the that Dungeon Master's Guide is considered the weakest of those three books. And again, the people on the podcast may have heard me say before, my understanding is like 3 months before it was supposed to come out, they took the guy who was supposed to write it and said, "You're working on Magic the Gathering now." And Chris Perkins, Jeremy Crawford, and other writers had to just suddenly fly in and write the Dungeon Master's Guide on very little notice. So even though there's a lot of good stuff in there, but like the organization doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense. But it's interesting that if that was the first D&D book that you purchased, it still did its job and transformed you into a fan.
Yeah, it definitely did its job. I think I was being an artist and a theater kid, the biggest draw for me was always the artistry in the books. So even while I was a baby nerd, baby D&D nerd, I was really drawn in by the beautiful drawings on the covers and on the pages, especially in the character creation and describing the different classes. That's really what kind of drew me in. Because like I said, short attention span, pretty pictures, they're what made me read a page.
I mean, and that art is indeed an eyeball feast. All right, I'm gonna read some more unless you want to say something, but that's
Sounds
fine.
great.
Okay, so. To be a Bladesinger, a character needs at least a 13 strength and constitution, as well as a 15 dexterity and intelligence. And again, if for those of you following along at home, if you're thinking about rolling 3d6 and getting those stats, it is not something that is really possible. Um, like two 13s, two 15s naked on a 3d6 is really hard to do. So of course, people just fudged it, right? Like whenever I was doing this, I was like, and I have a 3 18s. All right. Roll. While some characters may stay at home to defend the elven way, blade singers go out and actively promote it. They do this by seeking out their race's foes and eliminating them, either through words or actions. Acting as both diplomats and one elf armies, they ensure the safety of the elf race. And again, one elf army is amazing. Um, the Blade Singer is so cool that since its introduction, there's never been an edition of D&D that does not have a Blade Singer in it somewhere. Like usually not in the core books, but like they always get around to giving you that version of the Blade Singer. Um, so secondary skills, hunter, trader, barterer, trapper, furrier, weapon proficiencies, bonus, none. Recommended, one weapon style for use in combat and spells, two-handed style for when spells run out, bonus non-weapon proficiencies, blind fighting and dancing. Got to get that dancing. Recommended non-weapon proficiencies, etiquette, juggling, singing, tumbling, weaponsmithing. Equipment. The blade singer is always identifiable by his weapon of choice. Such an item is always ornate and beautiful, enhancing the blade singer's appearance in battle. And so they're dandies too, right? Like you gotta look good with you gotta have a
Yeah.
fancy sword. Now I imagine David Bowie, like a young David
Yes,
Bowie.
young David Bowie. Was that David Bowie in Labyrinth? Is
Oh
that
yes.
David Bowie?
Oh
Yeah,
yes.
that's what I'm picturing right now. I'm picturing Labyrinth David Bowie with a fancy bejeweled sword.
Distinctive appearance. Not only are they easily identifiable by their weapon of choice and cat-like grace, blade singers are decorated with their weapon guild's distinctive tattoo. Each guild has a separate and unique tattoo depicting its style of weapon through, page turning, through an animal representation. Long swords are often represented by great cats, such as lions or panthers. A whip would be shown as a striking snake, and so forth. And again, just so cool, right? Like, nobody's getting a bonus to hit based on their tattoo here, but like, just so awesome. Special benefits. There are four special benefits to the Blade Singer kit as follows. One, the blade singer chooses one weapon and practices with it extensively to the exclusion of most other weapons. If practice makes perfect, the blade singers are very well practiced in their weapon of choice, for they are virtually perfect. The poised steps of the blade song, the act of an attack by a blade singer, not only reveals the blade singer to be a creature of beauty even during battle, but the steps also carry him into advantageous positions for either offense or defense. He can instinctively grasp the flow of the battle around him, and his feet will carry him through the intricate maneuvers necessary to optimize his attack. Such is the intensive training of the blade singer that he gains an automatic +1 to hit as well as a +1 to damage. This is in addition to the normal elven +1 for use of the long or short sword if applicable. Despite any additional further training, this is as high as the bonus can be. 2. Blade singers receive a special bonus when they wish to try an unusual maneuver with their blade. This bonus is equal to +1 for every 4 levels the blade singer has attained. The bonus only serves to cancel the penalties normally applied to such a maneuver. All other penalties and bonuses still apply. And there's an example. An example.
I love it because as we're reading this, I'm thinking because I read it through when he gave me this article to chat about today, but I'm always wondering about how it looks like because it's one thing to read it and read it dry and then actually start playing it. Is I always appreciate an example.
Well, and with the first one, again, it's pretty straightforward, right? Like, okay, extra to hit,
Yeah,
extra to damage, get it.
yeah.
But like, special
But like
bonus that,
unusual maneuver.
yeah. And when it says it only applies to penalties, but and you can never get past 0, it's like, okay, this is a little extra math here, so I appreciate the example. Villana Pyrene, a fifth level Bladesinger, proficient in the longsword, attempts to disarm her opponent. A special maneuver. Normally, this gives her a +1 to initiative and a -4 to hit. Since she is a 5th level Blade Singer, however, her Blade Singing ability gains her a +1 on her disarm maneuver. Since she is an elf, she gains an additional +1 because she's using her sword. Finally, she gains a +1 for her Blade Singing ability with her sword. Her total is only a -1 to disarm her foe. If she were 12th level, she would have a +1 on her disarming attack. And at this point, I should mention something that was obvious even to me when I was reading it when I was 12, but was called out especially by Kevin Kulp's history of this book on Drive Through RPG, which is th maybe the stuff in here is kind of broken and makes elves so cool. You should ask yourself why play anything other than an elf using the complete Book of Elves. I mean, like you get the +1 to attack, and now you're getting you could disarm people, you can throw your long sword at somebody and pin them to a tree, like, just the amount of cool stuff you're getting here, and we're only two of four special abilities in. It's pretty obscene, but it's so cool.
So
Three,
maybe
go
this
ahead.
is coming from a place of ignorance. Is special ability or special maneuver literally just anything that's not just a direct hit or
I would have so
attack with a sword?
I would have to pull up my player's handbook to give you the specifics, but that is my recollection. My recollection is
Yeah.
that, like, you know, attack is attack, everything else is a special
Mhm.
maneuver, and obviously they had penalties for special maneuvers, um, which, based on, again, I don't even remember this, but based on what we just read here, it certainly seems like there's complicated rules for what you're going to do because they didn't want people to, disappointingly, in first and second edition, they were afraid of people getting too creative and getting too outside of the box. Like, uh, but I'd have to pull it off the shelf. But I think the answer to your question is yes.
I love how I never get a straight yes or no answer from you. I love how it always has a long story and backed up evidence. It makes it makes I want to make sure that you're hearing this. It's not facetious. It's genuine. I love that the answer is very well thought out. Whenever you answer a question, I can tell you've put a lot of thought into the answer.
I listen to a
I
lot of
appreciate that.
podcasts, and I listen to a lot of D&D podcasts, and it's remarkable the amount of, like, talking out of the butt that kind of happens. Um, and I try to I try to move from the butt to my mouth. So again, like I'm looking at my second edition player's handbook right here. I could pull it open and find the rule, but it's like, why stop our conversation in the middle to do that? But I also know how dangerous it is talking again without looking it up. And also there's a whole Discord full of people who could look it up and correct me afterwards. So
Yeah, so you gotta be like, it's more so like hedging your answer. Like, this is the parameters we're working with. Please don't call me out if I'm wrong because I didn't go get the book.
well, again,
So I'm
there's some
letting you know.
some people will know off the top of their head. Other people will just be like, will look it up and then will correct me on the Discord. I'll send you a link to the Discord, and you can get a very proper, lengthy answer to this question. Um, and but that is the reason for hedging and all that stuff. Like, I just learned years ago, if I talk too broadly or talk off the cuff, I'll make mistakes. And maybe it's an author thing too. Like, I get to fact check my book. Like, I revise my books dozens of times before I send them out. Like, lawyers read them to make sure that I won't get anybody sued. So it's odd to be like, well, we're just sitting here and I'm doing it by the seat of my pants, even though I'm producing similarly. But was that a satisfying response?
That was a very satisfying response. It's I mean, it's like when I'm giving lessons to my students, especially when it's formative lessons in math, I have to really make sure that I know exactly what I'm presenting to them, and I can't talk off the cuff because it's literally their first time hearing this. And if I present it wrong, they're gonna go in a wrong direction with understanding math and their math map, as I call it. So I always make sure that I'm really really well prepped when I give math lessons. I
That
prep other lessons too. I don't want to get called out in the Discord server being like, this teacher only preps math. What about the other subjects? No, I prep the other subjects too. It's just not as immediate of a need. If I misspeak while presenting about an animal, they're not going to then no longer know how to identify animals. If I misspeak while teaching them a mathematical concept, it might solidify something wrong in their brain that will not present itself until later in their math journey.
and then you'll hear about it from that teacher.
Oh yeah, and then I'll hear the teacher be like, what happened here?" I'm like, "Gotcha."
All right. Three, blade singers have been taught from an early age to grasp the flow of magic around them and turn it to their advantage. They can cast spells even while in the front lines. Although they cannot actually attack while casting their spells, they may defend themselves against incoming melee attacks. Their defense is equal to their level divided by 2 plus 1. All fractions are rounded down. Thus, a 6th level blade singer gains plus 4 to his armor class. 6th level divided by 2 equals 3 plus 1 to result in a additional 4 armor class. The same goes for 7th level blade singers. 7 divided by 2 equals 3.5 minus zero point 0.5 equals 3 plus 1 for a 4 armor class. Plus 4 to armor class. This does not apply to rear or missile attacks, for it is nearly impossible to defend against those while casting a spell. And like the second edition, like first edition was pretty broken. And with second edition, they had a choice, which was, are we going to fix the broken stuff? Or are we just going to kind of patch things up? And they decided they had to patch things up. Um, they were afraid that if they made it too different, people would be like, "Well, I can't play this game anymore. It's not the same game." So there were a lot of weird. There was a lot of weird stuff from first edition that made it into second, and the way armor class works is definitely one of them. And just all the rules around spell casting. So again, you're kind of seeing that here, where like, the it was much easier to hit a wizard who was casting a spell, and here it's like, well, blade singers, they can at least defend themselves while casting a spell, which is another reason that blade singers were super cool. Blade singers have practiced the somatic portion of their spells well enough that they may cast their spells one-handed, suffering only a slight penalty. It adds plus 2 to their casting times, making it easier to disrupt their spells. Are you familiar with verbal, somatic, and material components for spells? Is that in 5th edition?
I'm gonna be honest, I do not know that too much about
That's
that. No.
great. That means they took it out. So in first and second edition, I don't know about it in third, but at least in first and second, it was like every spell would have like a code that was for V, S, and M. And V meant like you have to be able to talk to cast the spell. Somatic meant you're waving your hands around, making the magical signs. And material would be like, oh yeah, and you need like a lizard skin. And like once you cast this, so like if you had your hands bound and you were casting a spell that was a verbal spell, you could still do it. But if you wanted to cast a spell with a somatic component and your hands were bound, you couldn't do it. But I think, and I sure hope that this was third edition with Jonathan Tweed. At some point, they were like, "This is way too much work. We're just ditching it and like leaving it for the DMs to figure out." Or else there might be rules in fifth edition. I don't know. Again, now I'm talking out of my butt again. Uh,
Yep.
but uh, but again, I can't remember seeing verbal, somatic, and material components since second edition.
I can't remember seeing that either. And like I said, I've only DM'd fifth edition, so I could also be talking out of my butt and displaying about how chaotic of a DM I am, but I don't seem to recall any sort of somatic versus any
Material
others
comp
for as
Yeah.
well. All I know, yeah, all I know is just spell slots and that you have to have a long rest before you're able to cast certain spells again, but then you've got your cantrips that you can cast at any time. That's what I know.
Yeah, when again, it's just like by fifth, I'm fairly certain they're gone because again, fifth is famously the simplest version of D&D since 1980. Um,
Hmm.
but anyway, what it's saying here is if you're a blade singer, you don't need both hands to do the somatic stuff. You can do it one-handed and be fighting with a sword in your other hand. How cool! And it is very cool, you know. Um,
And if you have to worry about the hands, yeah, that is a very cool skill to have. Because
it
I'm just trying to imagine like real life battle. well, not real life, but imagining a movie version of playing a campaign in my head. That's always how I play, is I've got the movie going on in my head. Of if that wasn't a skill that they had, and they had to, in order to cast a spell, they needed both hands, just middle of battle, laying down your weapon. Ooh, picking it back up.
Oh God. All right. Well, I won't horrify you by segueing into weapon speeds here. Um, all right, adds +2 to their casting times, making it easier to disrupt their spells. Like any other spellcaster, if they are hit, they lose the concentration necessary for maintaining their spells. They lose the spell. Their spells are, therefore, usually of an offensive nature with very short casting times. 4. The training is hard enough that only a third level Bladesinger can begin to teach even the rudiments of the blade song. If another elf wishes to learn the blade song, he must seek one of the masters of the blade. Blade singers charge a high price for sharing their skills. Special hindrances. To offset their abilities, blade singers suffer some severe penalties. Well, do they? Let's see. Not only not only must they attempt to advance the cause of elfendom somehow at all times, they must also lend aid to any elf in need. Unless the elf is proven to be an enemy of the elven way of life, the blade singer must sacrifice life and limb to save the elf's life. Of course, the blade singer is free to determine whether there is, in fact, an elf in danger. Too many times other races have tried to eliminate the blade singer menace through illusion and trickery. The blade singers have grown wary and have, unfortunately, allowed fellow elves to perish while trying to determine the truth of the threat. Thus, most blade singers carry at least one detect magic spell in order to avoid possible errors. Blade singers are
So
so
wait,
devoted. Good.
wait. They have all of these to offset their abilities, blade singers must suffer their penalties, and their penalties is what they have to use their awesome abilities for.
Kind of, yeah. You have noticed one of the things that people complained about with this book, which is that a lot of the hindrances for these awesome character kits are kind of story based, plot based, and
Yeah.
responsible for the dungeon master to kind of come up with something for.
Yeah.
It's not like I don't know, they have to cut out an eye or something, and thus they have a constant penalty to yeah, to attacks. Um, there's story-based hindrances, and if you're just gonna like dungeon crawl, uh, again, it's really rare to. I can't think of a dungeon I've ever run where it's like, and there's an elf in danger, and you have to go save them. Like I can't think of a time I've had anything like that. So it really is up to the dungeon master to know the kit and to know that this is the hindrance, and that is not the way dungeon masters work in my experience. I don't know about you.
No, not typically. I do like to use my players' backgrounds that they come up with, and I've got some very creative background players. I had this one character that was in one of my campaigns, Bart the Bard, but with a Boston accent, so he was Bart the Bard. Uh, he had a very fun backstory that I got to play with. Or I remember there's another player who's had this backstory of they had a traumatic experience with a bear, and so I wrote a bear character in there. The traumatic experience with the bear was not a part of his race class written in the book. That was an entirely character choice, which I did have fun with, but I don't know if I've played with too many players that go this in depth into the backstory of their characters. They're very into the setup of how their players work with the plus ones, plus minus advantage to hit, advantage for damage. But I've never had a player that goes this much into like the given lore for their characters. It's usually just the character ability setup that we focus on. I don't know about in your experience.
One of the designers of third edition, Skip Williams, he answered the Sage Advice column for Dragon magazine in the second edition era. So if this is before the internet, so if there was a mistake in the book, a problem in the rules, or anything like that, you would have to like physically write into TSR or call them on the phone. People actually called them on the phone about rule stuff. and be like, "Hey, what's up with this thing?" Um, and because I shouldn't say because, but given that he had such long experience with people contacting him about problems in second edition, that's one of the reasons he was put on the third edition team. And one of the things he said about second edition was we would give people penalties to stuff and then everyone would just ignore them because it was often up to the player to be like, well, I'm doing this thing, I'm making this character choice, and it gives me this penalty, and then they would just forget about it at the table. I want to say there were complicated rules for dual wielding, and oftentimes, again, characters would be like, "I'm using two long swords," and just forget about the penalties at the table. So in the design of
Mhm.
third edition, they were like, "We're going to go longer on the bonuses and shorter on the penalties." And by longer on the bonuses, I should rephrase that to say maybe even tone down some of the bonuses, because they were like, people just don't do it, and I see that this isn't mechanical, but I see that as a similarity here, where the hindrance is rather particular and dependent on the DM, so it just doesn't seem like it's something that's really going to happen that much. Although, again, a good dungeon master, you could do a whole campaign on this. Like, the Bladesinger leaves to go get a donut and sees an elf get kidnapped, and now it's 30 sessions of trying to rescue this one elf and chasing down, I don't know, purple worms or something that have taken this elf child. Um, but in other words, your observation is totally correct. I don't suppose you remember Bart the Bard's backstory. That sounded fascinating.
I'm trying to remember it offhand. It's our coworker Jamie's character. I don't it was her character in the campaign that we were running with a bunch of staff people. So it was like the second or third campaign I had DM'd. And it was made up of a bunch of teachers who, after school, we were playing a campaign together. And only two people had played D&D before, and one of them was Jamie, our coworker, and then everyone else at the table was brand new to D&D. So what happened was the two people who had played D&D before really had fun with their character creation, and I'm trying to remember the twisting backstory of Bart the Bard. Oh, Jamie's gonna be so mad at me that I can't remember his backstory. But I remember that when she gave me her character sheet, that she like specifically pointed out something in her backstory of some traumatic past that I had to write into the character, and I can't believe that I'm blanking on what
I
it was
mean,
right now. I'm so sorry.
all
Ruining the
characters with
juicy tidbit.
all characters with Boston accents have sad backstories.
Yes, exactly.
You know.
Correct. Yes.
All right, we're coming to the end here. Um, Blade singers are so devoted to their chosen weapon that they can never learn another one. Unlike other elves, they do not gain a +1 to hit with a bow. With all other weapons, they suffer a -1 penalty to hit, even if they have already taken it as a proficiency. If they have not devoted the slot to learn the weapon, the blade singer suffers the ordinary non-proficiency in addition to the -1 penalty. If the player is using the complete fighter's handbook, he may not allow his character to specialize in weapon groups. The blade singer focuses on a single weapon only. I had the complete fighter's handbook as well, and it really did
Yeah.
pair for nightmare characters. Like you could extra specialization. Oh, the bonuses. Oh, the bonuses. Um, but I will not fall down that hole here. Let me just keep talking. Uh, Blade singers may wear no armor heavier than elven chainmail or studded leather. Bulkier armor restricts the blade singer's movement enough that they have at least a -2 penalty to attacks if they try to use their blade singing ability while wearing such armor. The penalty is greater for heavier armor, although this is at the DM's discretion. Blade singers rarely use weapons other than swords. With only rare exceptions, they never learn two-handed fighting styles. They may not use shields or two-handed weapons, for these interfere with the blade song. Even when they have run out of spells, blade singers will fight one-handed or with both hands on their single-handed weapon. To do otherwise negates all blade singing bonuses. Wealth options. Blade singers start their adventuring lives with 30 to 180 gold pieces and only one restriction. They must purchase their weapon of choice. Any monies left after buying their initial equipment must be returned to the Bladesingers Guild. Later in their adventures, they must take opportunities to upgrade their weapons. Other than these restrictions, they are free to do as they wish with their money. Suggested elf subraces, gray elf, and high elf. So, what do you think of the Bladesinger?
It's definitely interesting. I can definitely see why seventh and eighth grade Ben Riggs was obsessed with this character and made many a character without having a campaign to play it with. But I also see why it is not exactly the same way in more modern renditions of D&D because the attack bonuses are insane in this.
So, Colin McComb, like so many people, went on to be in video games, and he worked on a video game called Torment Tides of Numenera for Numenera. And during the Kickstarter for that video game, he kind of apologized for how overpowered this book was. And it's hilarious to me that decades after writing it, people are still talking to him about it and thinking about it and being like, "It was so awesome, but so overpowered." And it definitely is really, really overpowered. Um, and you have to. One of my buddies who got really into D&D said, "So I'll allow the player's handbook, Dungeon Master Guide, Monster Manual at the table. Other than that, the players get to choose one other book. There is one other book that they can dip into and take stuff from. But this guy was like, it just gets to be so much if you allow everyone to draw from everything that again, the dungeon master can't keep track of it, right? So you could have a blade singer getting all these amazing bonuses and you don't even know about their special hindrances because like if everyone does this, you're just responsible for so much stuff. It becomes impossible. Um, and two, just at the table, if you have a question, you have to look stuff up, and there's now you have to figure out which book the question is in. It can become an unending nightmare. So restricting it to one book really helped him. But man, even if you're restricted to the complete book of elves, you could still have so much nonsense and so much nightmare stuff happen.
Well, my favorite thing being a DM in the age of the internet and only having played in the age of the internet, whenever something comes up that we as the table can't figure out according to the rules, Google. And Google always gives me the answer. Google will link the exact paragraph in the handbook. I can even look it up for what edition I'm looking for. I'm like, fifth edition, what happens when blah, blah, blah. Internet is fantastic and is probably why I feel like a terribly inadequate DM when I talk to you because you have it all memorized. And I have memorized of how to run a game and the mechanics of running the game and all the intricacies of the rules. I don't keep those memorized because I know I can pull them up really quickly.
Well, and I want to say I heard Mike Merles say something about that once, where uh, now I'm going to misquote Mike Merles. Um,
Don't do that.
yeah, I'll just retract this statement before I even get going down it. Um, but it is a one of the great things about playing D&D now is it's just so much easier for that exact reason, being able to Google everything and not having to be like, well, we can't have seven books at the table. How would we find the answer to anything? It's all online now. Again, I back in the day was like, well, obviously the internet and video games will kill Dungeons and Dragons. It's going to be this cottage industry, that just keeps shrinking and shrinking as people die. But again, the last 10 years, D&D has been rock and roll. It has been more culturally relevant than rock and roll. I've had more D&D kids come through my classroom than rock and roll kids. Only one rock and roll kid in the past 10 years came through my classroom, but dozens of D&D kids did.
And I'm
Um,
prepping a bunch of young D&D kids in my classroom. I
So,
get them with the dice.
do you have any strong feelings on elves?
Not particularly. My favorite race to play it has always been Dragonborns. just because they're really fun to draw.
Huh.
Once again, going back to the I love pictures. So I always was drawn to the Dragonborns just because they've got a really cool look to them. And I love playing as a green Dragonborn with the acid splash. It's always a fun weapon of like, even if I lost my sword in combat, I still got acid breath.
Oh, that's pretty funny. Um, the and again, one of the interesting things contrasting this product with the fifth edition era is um there's really been nothing quite like the rash of books that came out of TSR in the early 90s where they had the complete fighter, the complete wizard, the complete thief, the complete elf, the complete dwarf, the complete halfling. And in like 2 or 4 years, they had a book come out for basically everyone and everything. And if you had them all, it would just be this long line of leatherette books sitting on your shelf. And they were just trying to figure out like how to keep the company up and keep things moving, and they had the idea of, oh well, we'll make specialty books for all the classes and all the races. And then they started doing historical eras as well, like they did a, I think, a Viking Age book, and the complete guide to ninjas. The book sold pretty well, and again, they brought some money in for a couple of years. And if you were a player, you could understand why you'd want to buy these books because it really did give you fun toys for the table. And fifth edition explicitly did nothing like that. Like third edition aped that, where like there was there were like complete elf books. I think it was called the complete fighter book. It might have been a complete marshals book where like all the martial classes had stuff in one book. But for fifth edition, they were like, no, we're not doing that. We are cutting back on the amount of product that we're putting out there. And interestingly, even though they made less product, they sold more of it by making less apparently. But in the lead up to 2024 D&D, a thing I kept hearing was Jeremy Crawford, the lead designer on podcasts, being like, "Oh, dungeon masters are gonna hate this new rule where, oh, players, you get this new option." So I have not read the 2024 D&D, but it'll be interesting to see where it falls on that spectrum. Um, and is it like, trying to sell more to players by giving players cool stuff? Is that the reason that you want to go pick up the new edition? Because now there's new player stuff, but that complicates the game and there's more rules, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So have you picked up the 2024 books yet or no?
I have not, but I was just about to pose the question of because DMs like myself who live in the age of the internet where I don't feel like I have to have all the rules memorized or I don't have to feel slogged down by looking it up, that I can just look it up on the internet. I don't have to look through a book. I'm wondering, do you think that future editions of D&D are going to start getting more complicated and souped up like this again, just because DMs don't have to worry about digging through a book. You can just look it up online.
Have you heard about Shadow Dark?
Familiarly, but not super familiar.
So
Like,
Shadow Dark is take fifth edition, strip it down to its engine, its wheels, its steering column, its gas pedal, and its brake. Like as minimal as you can possibly be. Like there's no skills in Shadow Dark. Um, and then you take that and you run dungeon crawling with it. And like I heard about it and I was like, okay, it sounds interesting. Um, but then I've played it. I'm going to say I've probably played 6 sessions, run 6 sessions of it now, and at the table it just flies. Um, the book is really well organized. It's really well put together. It's very easy to find things, and the rules are very simple. It seems like almost every design decision was based around how simple can we make this thing? And the simplicity of the game makes it go so fast. It makes it just flies by. It makes it a ton of fun because the pacing is so good. So I would guess that even if you add in complexity to a version of D&D, and you're adding it in the age of the internet when you don't need to take 5 minutes to look it up, but you still need to look it up on Google. Um, I'm gonna give the advantage still to the more simple game because even with the more simple game, you don't need to stop the fun to look something up. Um, have you ever looked at? I'm gonna do an episode on the wish spell, I think, in a week or two. Um, are you familiar with Wish in fifth edition?
Marginally. I haven't encountered that in any of the campaigns that I've run, so I read about it when I was first prepping, but I haven't had to use it in a game.
So yeah, again, I'm gonna talk out of my butt now, but like it's a wish spell, but there's limits on it. Like you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other thing. But if you look up wish in Shadow Dark, it's a wish. You can change reality any way you want to one time. You could make yourself a god if you felt like it. Done. And it's way shorter, but you could really wreck things. Like it's a wrecking ball, right? But it's so much more
Maybe
fun.
that's why I haven't had that in any of my campaigns,
Yeah,
if it's such
maybe.
a wrecking ball. That's probably why.
And one night we were playing, and I think this was like a second level Shadow Dark dungeon, and it was designed for Shadow Dark. And you get to this one room, and if you put a jewel you found earlier in the palm of a statue, you get a wish spell. And a character, by total coincidence, does exactly that. Takes the jewel they found, puts it in the hand of the statue, and gets a wish spell. And again, the player is like, well, there's all sorts of limitations on that, right? And I'm like, I don't know, it's Shadowdark, man. We look it up, and it's like, oh yeah, total godlike power for one decision. And they were like, well, I'm just going to use it to blow up this whole dungeon, and we can move on with our lives. And I'm like, okay, great, that happens. You blow up the dungeon with the wish spell and move on with your lives. And again, that simplicity seems to lend speed and fun to the table. So yeah, I don't know. Like until you have a computer doing it, which is again I think what Wizards wants, they want somehow to come up with a digital DM who is so good that we'll all pay for the digital DM. And again, if they did that and it worked, great. Um, that'd be worth $20 a month if no one had to run. Um, but again, you'd probably lose some. Now I've rambled really off topic.
I mean, because you rambled right into something that I'm passionate about. Because I mean, AI can do a lot of things, and computers can do a lot of things, but what they can't do is be human, and they can't do the creativity of humanity. Because the most fun campaigns that I have are ones that have gone completely off the rail and are incredibly creative and would require a lot of calculations from a computer to do. I mean, even with how advanced AI has gotten, the writing is always stilted. You can always tell when it's written by AI versus written by an actual educated, competent writer. You can always tell. It just doesn't feel quite the same cadence as good, eloquent writing.
I mean, and I hope that's true forever.
Me too.
But I'm a
Because otherwise, artists are out of a job. I hope that it stays the same.
I mean, again, a thing I keep
New
coming back
title
to.
for this series, two DM nerds debate AI
Well,
technology.
on the one hand, like I have used an awful lot of AI at the gaming table. Like generate 10 ideas for a complication that could happen when you're walking through the mines of Moria. Okay, great. Um, and that's great. Uh, but when you look at how much better AI has gotten at art and how quickly it has gotten better, it's upsetting and disturbing. Um, I am I don't know if I'm an AI pessimist or optimist because I think that it's going to get way better. I think it's going to get way better more quickly than any of us can anticipate, and that in many ways, uh, what do you do when the value of human labor plummets to practically zero, is going to be a struggle sometime in our lifetimes. Um, and now there's the optimist way of looking at that, where it's like, oh, well, then there's utopia, right? Like, yeah, artists can still do art because there's no other useful way to spend your time. Like, because the value of things is so low, we can just, our 3D printers can 3D print us whatever we want. Our nanites can monitor our health, and the AI robots make crops and deliver them to us, and blah 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 blah. And it's a utopia, right? But then there's the dark version where it's like, yeah, it'll be like that for some people, but certainly not for everyone because capitalism. Um, and again,
Yeah.
and now I've stumbled from nerdistry into politics. So that is,
So maybe we should put the kibosh on that.
yeah, that's probably a good place to stop. Um, Anything else you want to say about anything?
No, this is pretty fun. I enjoyed learning about some different editions because I am woefully uneducated in these earlier editions. Before this, I really only had the experience of 3.5 with the one campaign that we did for a while, which was kind of fun. I actually really enjoyed 3.5 edition.
What did you enjoy so much about 3.5?
I enjoyed the skills, specialties, and oh, I forgot what the term was, but that I could like choose special skills. I really enjoyed the skill list
Hmm.
and how instead of just having a specific advantage over a general skill such as strength, is that you could specialize, hyper specialize in like one display of strength.
Yeah, I want to say it was a
I thought
longer
that was,
skill list in 3.5.
yeah. Yeah. And like you still had your main headings of your strength, intelligence, dexterity, and it told you which one the skill list was under. But I liked that you could specialize. So if you had a really good score for one of your main skills and then you specialized in one, you could get a really nice bonus on that one specific skill, which would really come in handy if you needed it in the campaign. Like I think one was like rock climbing, and I'm like, yeah, I hope this comes up. And you know what? It did come up. It did come up in our
Yeah, you
campaign.
had to climb a mountain, as I recall.
Yes, we did.
It was a
And
race
so
up
I
and down a
was so
mountain.
happy.
It worked out
Yeah.
really well. Those were the days. But yeah, and again, like one of the things is first edition kind of came broken, but it was also, it came 5 years after the birth of role playing, so we're lucky to have to have gotten anything. Uh, Second edition left a lot of things unfixed, and third edition tried to fix everything and do it in a way that made sense, and it largely succeeded. And people were kind of like, "Oh, D&D is so much better now than it ever has been before." And then 5e took it and stripped it all down. And we're like, "Oh, D&D has really been better than it ever has been before," which is why, again, the 2024 edition I think is maybe going to be a hard sell. I talked to someone who ran D&D for a couple years while they were making the 2024 version of D&D, and he presented it as again a glow up where they're going to fix a few things here, put in some minor improvements, but the car is still basically the same car that you were driving before. And if you played fifth edition, like you can play with someone who plays 2024 D&D and it'll be fine. Again, I haven't read the player's handbook, so I just don't know if that's true. Maybe I need to start a reading circle to read the 2024 player's handbook just to be up with
I'll read it.
things. All right, we'll
Yeah.
talk about it. So, with that, let me outro. But before I do, let me say, Eliza, thank you so much for being on the show. Feel free to come on anytime. I'll shoot you a link to the Discord server if you want to pop over and talk to people. If not, that's fine too. For those of you who don't know, we have a Discord, which I am woefully inadequate in talking to people on, and I need to be better about that. Um, but Patreon subscribers get access to the Discord server. Um, we also post seminars I do for patrons only. I do a lot of seminars at Gen Con and other conventions. We post those for only subscribers. I think we'll be getting one up in November. If we don't, it'll be very early in December, but you should be getting another seminar soon. Lastly, Dr. Scott Bruner and I are still reading the Dungeon Master's Guide aloud, but we are going to move that to a Patreon only exclusive. And we only have one Patreon tier of $3 a month. So if you want to get access to all of those things for the mere price of a cup of coffee, please hie you forth to Patreon and do that. Please become a Patreon subscriber so that we can keep the lights on here. With that, again, I'm Eliza. I'm going to say thank you so much for being here and hope to have you on again sometime.
Thanks. Hope to come on this again sometime. This is pretty fun.
Cool. Bye-bye.